And welcome everybody to the first in the series, Considerations and Strategies for Running Clinical Trials During this COVID-19 Pandemic. I do apologise for the delay in the commencement of this webinar. There was a fair amount of congestion with so many people dialing in. Those who are having difficulty or couldn't get on, we will be recording this webinar, and so people will be able to access it at a later time. So again, welcome and thank you for taking part in this webinar. The goal of the webinar series will be running some 10 webinars over the next 10 to 12 weeks. Is really to share knowledge and information and to identify practical and pragmatic solutions to support clinical trials and clinical trial sites as all parties work together to mitigate the effects on clinical trial patients until this COVID-19 situation eases. So at ARCS, we've taken the approach that broad and effective communication across all those involved in running clinical trials will be vitally important. To be clear though, in relation to the government's position on their response to COVID-19, we do direct you to the health.gov.au site. So the focus is going to be on the delivery of clinical trials. The regular webinars I think will be helpful for you. Each webinar will start with a concise update on new information. And it will be followed by a topic lead who will give their updates, and then we'll give you ample opportunity for Q&A. But next slide, and I'd like to welcome and to thank MTP Connect, who have come on board to sponsor this series. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dan Grant, the Managing Director and CEO of MTP Connect, the Industry Growth Centre for the MedTech and Pharma sector in Australia.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Shani. MTP Connect is very pleased to be sponsoring this important series of webinars. We know that clinical trials are critically important in Australia, not only for patient outcomes, but for the economic benefits that they bring to our community. Right now, we're experiencing an unprecedented situation, and this free webinar series aims to support clinical trial continuity throughout this time. As we come to terms with new ways of working and sharing information, we hope this platform will help everyone during this challenging time. I really don't want to say anything else other than to, again, thank everyone for joining us today and to pass on my wishes to each of you. We hope that you and your families are safe during this time. Back to you, Shani.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. If we go on to the next slide, just so that we can run this and make this interactive, we will be keeping attendees in either listening or participating modes during this event, making sure that we want to make sure that everybody who's attending is a registered attendee. With that, because we will be recording this event, we'd ask that people don't record the event themselves. We need to respect people's permissions. Where possible, reserve your questions until the Q&A, and we'll coordinate those questions by a facilitator. In addition to the webinar, ARCS has had constructed a survey that will be shared more broadly and is aimed at collecting information to help understand what's happening and focusing our activities. If you're interested in taking part in that survey, we can send you the link to that. And also, if you want further information, we'd be happy to send that to you at a later, after this webinar. Please let us know if you don't want to receive further information. So that's that. So going on to the next slide, as I said before, this series is about the ways that we can, as a group, work towards really surviving through this situation with this pandemic. If you look at the next slide, the pandemic has really escalated. We're in exponential mode. Hourly, we are having updates from the government about what the situation is, and keeping abreast of all of that is really quite a challenge. If we go to the next slide, we've provided to you as part of this series a listing of the different stakeholder areas that will be presenting and leading the conversations going forward. On the next slide, for those of you who are on this call who don't know us, we're ARCS Australia. We've been around for some 35 years, providing education and communication across the sector. On the next slide, just also with a clinical trial focus, we're providing a webinar on the Commission's National Clinical Trials Governance Framework, and I think that would be of interest to a whole range of you. So look, that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. If we move on to the next slide, that will take you into the slides that are being presented by our speakers for today. We have a number of speakers, panelists today speaking to you. The first of these is Rob Kent. Rob is at the Kinghorn Cancer Centre, and he's joined by Cheryl Ann Hawkins from the Alfred Hospital, Romana from also from the Prince Alfred Hospital, who's a senior pharmacist, and Sally Beresford Harvey, a senior manager at Covance. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Rob, who will take us through the next part of the webinar. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks very much, Shani. And could I just say, I think that Romana's having trouble getting through, so I'm not sure if Joe could contact her in the background and try and sort out her audio issues. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is a bit of a duplicate from before, and I mainly put in the stats not because you haven't been flooded with information, but because the actions and the responses that we are doing is changing almost on every couple of hours. So just go next slide. As you can see, we're up to 1,350 patients in Australia. New South Wales is leading the infection rate, and as a lot of the statistics are showing, we're usually measuring it from the first 100 patients to the escalation and the clinical needs as we go ahead. We're followed by Victoria and Queensland, who seem to be about 4 or 5 days behind us. Next slide. This slide is a bit hard to read, but these are showing the different countries in comparison to the states of Australia. The numbers do escalate as you get higher, so that it doesn't give you a true picture. But at the moment, at 1,000 people, day 13, New South Wales is running around 20% of that of the US at the same time. You can see the top line is you can see is Spain, followed by the longest top line is the next one down is Italy. The USA is in between, and you've got the flattening curve, that is South Korea. And South Korea is what people are talking about trying to emulate as we try and flatten the curve. Currently, Australia is second in line after South Korea in testing. I think we're around 2,000 tests per million so far. So we are, everyone is doing their bit to try and hopefully with the mitigation efforts that the government has implemented in the last 24 hours, we will continue to flatten that line. Next slide. with that, we're just going to run through what we're doing individually at our sites, and I'm very pleased to have Cheryl Ann contribute to what's happening in Victoria. And I'll hand it now over to Cheryl Ann to go through what her study is.
Thanks, Robert, and hi to everyone on the call today. If you want to go to the next slide, please. As Robert has said, Victoria is a little behind New South Wales in regards to our exposure to COVID-19, and the contingency plan that I'm presenting today is what we came up with about 10 days ago. And as Robert said, the day on day, our plan keeps on evolving, and as our hospital is affected at this stage, we have to keep on top of things to ensure that we do have a safe environment for our patients and for our staff. So my priority in oncology for patients with cancer is to ensure that patients can keep on receiving their cancer therapy, and also ensuring that symptomatic and staff patients are kept at home at all times. Overnight, the Alfred has also implemented that any staff members that are symptomatic, regardless of whether they have a temperature or not, can be COVID-19 tested. And from today, all our patients are pre-screened before coming into outpatient clinic. Next slide, please. So what I have been doing over the last week, and what I will continue to do, I think you need to go back one slide. The slide before this one. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Please, yeah, next slide. So what I have been conducting over the last week, and what I'll continue to do in the near future, is site selection visits will be completed by the phone. And we're doing these in combination with the information that we have on site docs and SIP. And I don't know if many sites have been set up with site docs, but site docs is an electronic site folder, and sponsors and monitors are able to electronically log on to site docs and view our site folder. This is also going to become important in the coming weeks as my staff start working from home when that need arises. We also have a site profile up on SIP, and we're hoping that with site docs and SIP, over the coming months, we can still potentially do site evaluations to potentially open studies in the future. We've postponed all monitoring visits. There's no monitors are allowed on site now, so they're going to be doing visits via site docs. And at this stage, we don't have the capabilities to be conducting remote monitoring, full remote monitoring visits. But what we are asking is that sponsors do phone into the site, even if it's just for half an hour, while they're reviewing their ECRFs and site docs, to ask any key questions to the study coordinators. At this stage, at the Alfred, staff haven't been redeployed into the main hospital, but it's my expectation as the weeks and the months go by that my study coordinators who are nurses may have to complete this and may be called elsewhere to work. I am looking at access to EMR remotely for monitors, but as most people can appreciate, the privacy issues and logistics issues to set that up has been challenging, but it's something that I'm trying to continue. We did have an SIV last week, and that may be the last SIV that we will be conducting for the foreseeable future. And at this stage, we do have an OGTR audit booked in for April, but that's also going to have to be postponed until we're able to have external people on site. Next slide. So for treating, for starting today, and this is just new, hot off the press, we're going to be conducting all our AE and ConMed assessment via telephone for all non-treatment visits. So the registered nurse, PI or sub-investigator will be conducting those calls rather than getting patients into site. We're also instructing patients to use local pathology collection centres, and if radiology department here at the Alfred is overwhelmed or unable to conduct any radiology assessments, then we'll be asking patients to go to a local radiology centre for CT assessments. All our central bloods will be suspended if they are scheduled for a non-treatment visit day, and we most probably will be halting enrolment into our dose escalation studies, but that hasn't been 100% confirmed at this stage. So they're all our early phase studies. So I think that will happen, but I'm still yet to have that confirmed by the medical team. Next slide. So to screen patients that have suspicious or confirmed COVID-19, we've set up 2 staff members who are phoning all the patients the day before to do an assessment on patients who have got coughs, colds, sore throats or fevers. Any patients that are exhibiting any of those symptoms are referred to our research fellows, and they are managing those patients the day before they come in. We will still continue to do telephone AE and CODMED assessments by the RN, PI or SI at this stage, and patients will be instructed not to have any local pathology or imaging completed until their symptoms have resolved or their 14 days post COVID-19 has taken place. Next slide. For patients, we have had patients who are refusing to come on site for fear of contracting COVID-19, and we again will be completing telephone AEs and ConMeds. We'll be instructing patients to use their local pathology and radiology service, and we're also encouraging patients to report any serious concerns to site. Next slide. So one of the big pieces of work that I'm working on this morning is the contingency plan for staff who are unable to come to work. As we all know, clinical trial activity will be reduced because of COVID-19, but if I don't have staff on site, then all clinical trial activity will be reduced. The priority at site will be for any enrolled patients and to ensure that they receive treatment. Data entry will need to be reduced, and we'll be prioritising related adverse events and SAE events only. All our amendments and administration tasks will be suspended or prioritised in relation to how many staff I've got on site. Our RGO and HREC submissions may be delayed, and data locks, I'm sure we won't have the resources to adhere to the timelines required for those. Robert will be presenting to you very shortly his plan in regards to staff presence at site, which I think is fabulous, and I will be initiating at Alfred Health as soon as this phone call is finished, and I'll leave him to talk that through with you. Next slide. So from sponsor, what we want is any notifications for the potential for any disruption in the supply of drugs, kits, study supplies or couriers. I've had a few couriers over the last week quite concerned that they're not going to be able to send central samples, but I haven't had any confirmation from any sponsor that central samples are an issue at this stage. I also would like a monitoring or an oversight plan shared with site so that we can be aware of how the sponsor would be completing oversight of each study. And if we can get support in protocol changes to facilitate a widening of windows for patient visits, that would be great, but I understand that each protocol is individual and each circumstance with each patient is also individual. Next slide. So there's going to be an enormous HREC and RGO impact on the COVID-19 and your protocol and GCP breaches are inevitable. I've instructed my staff from this morning to set up spreadsheets to document with each of their patients any deviations. I know there are instructions being published shortly in regards to through Transalerate, which I'll access the website soon, in regards to what will be a GCP breach in this pandemic era. We will be prioritising safety reports to RGO and to HREC, and our governance, our RGO at site has considered that non-serious breaches can be submitted at the end of the COVID-19 pandemic in a summary form for each study. So hopefully that won't be in too far in the near future, but I am anticipating that will be in the second half of this year. Next slide. I just want to encourage you to use your HREC and your RGO for information. FDA has published a guidance during the pandemic, during this pandemic, and the website, if you go to FDA, you'll be able to read that document. EMA has also released a statement, and Transalerate as well. So I encourage you to review those documents, and I will hand over now to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl Ann. Could you just take through the next slide, please? And the next one. So look, thank you for putting on this program. I just want to run through a lot of the processes that Cheryl Ann has been implementing. We are also implementing here. So I've tended to focus on what our pandemic response plan is. So we've broken down the levels of risk down into green, which is risk mitigation, which is currently what we're operating under at the moment. And green represents when there's community-based risk, followed by yellow, which is risk reduction once we start having registered cases inside the clinic, inside the hospital. And they're followed by red when we get widespread spread amongst the staff. Next slide. So basically, this under the risk categories, we've broken it down, as I said, through to the different areas. And under green, we will have patients given instructions to attend their clinic appointments via telehealth. And most of our appointments now are done via telehealth. This is just to basically reduce the amount of time the patients have to spend in the clinic and collect a lot of the data which is not required. A lot of their local safety bloods, which are not research specific, are collected in the community. And unless, of course, they're all pre-screened with telephone calls prior to arriving. If there are at high risk, they're referred to get tested prior to arriving. Under yellow, we will move into the next level where patients will only be seen here under extreme conditions. Next slide. Under red, this is when we are moving into the risk prevention or harm minimisation stage. Patients will be instructed to go to their local emergency departments. Patients will be given instructions to attend their appointments via telehealth only, and I will leave these slides available to you for your own. You can read them, downloadable from their website. Next slide. So under the category for our external visitors, currently we're allowing external visitors, but they're prohibited coming if they display any symptoms, and we are pre-screening all monitors or auditors prior to arriving, and only essential visits will be allowed. So currently we're pushing out any monitoring visits to the maximum under the monitoring plan, and we're restricting it to only one day per trial. This, of course, is being reassessed morning, and this may actually escalate up into yellow sometime in the next few days, in which case they will be prohibited. We have been looking at ways of trying to manage remote monitoring. Unfortunately, our EMR doesn't allow external access in a de-identified way, and under the current New South Wales privacy legislations, we cannot allow identified patient data accessible external to the institution. Next slide. Under our plan, we have broken our teams up into two key non-clinical and clinical areas. About 2 weeks ago, we started implementing work from home access through our database, so all our staff now have remote access. And we have commenced having non-clinical staff rotating through working from home. The main target of this is to keep a healthy workforce and allow for any contingency should there be staff infection who require the mandatory 2-week isolation. It will give us a team who are still remain healthy. It also gives us a 4 to 5 day time period from the time the staff have been working here to them displaying symptoms so that we can get them tested. Under level yellow, all staff will work from home unless they're required here, and we will look at that on a case-by-case basis, as with level red. Next slide. So under the current level, we're operating, but if we continue through to level yellow, we will then change from a patient per coordinator to a team approach. We will have everyone is currently being cross-trained onto all protocols, and we're having them onto a delegation log to allow that any particular day can be managed by any particular coordinator. We are breaking them up into teams so that we have a team here looking after any patients that will come through the clinic while we keep a separate workforce at home. We are supporting our research coordinators by having clinical support staff. We are provided through some nursing agencies. Currently under our plan, our operational plan, we've luckily preemptively put in about 20 to 30% of our workforce as being agency to give a flexible workforce, but this is now can be implemented to bring in the clinical staff who can work here and manage patients while keeping our core staff at home in case of emergency. We have given our agency staff the reassurances that if they do test positive, we will continue to pay them for the 14 days, so we can actually keep staff here and upscale as needed. Next slide. So currently for our staff, we have all staff have remote access. Non-clinical staff are working home on a 2 to 3 day ratio on alternate weeks. Clinical staff work from home on non-clinical days, and we've implemented some areas of our network where we can actually store work documents and pre-scan in documents to allow them to do data entry. maintain, do their emails and maintain a productive workflow as they work from home. We've increased our clinical support through the agency staff. We've changed our dress code to a much more casual approach, so that they must wear single-use clothing items. This will allow them to wash their clothes on return home and not have any transmission back into their home environment. We are looking to be able to implement scrubs, so the hospital has limited supplies, currently only implemented in A&E and operating theatres. But if we're able to source scrubs, we will implement scrubs as an option for staff who wish to use them while they're at work in a clinical setting. We've offered free parking to all our staff to allow them to avoid public transport. And all team meetings are done in the virtual environment, even though we're sitting within about 50 feet of each other. Our regular team meetings are now done via telephone. Next slide. So for the patients, all patients are pre-screened for risk. Downstairs in the cancer centre, we have a small clinic where if anyone is symptomatic, they are steered into it for COVID-19 testing by a trained staff member. All non-central testing is completed in the community for safety bloods. Any scans, data is collected preemptively via telehealth, just to remove the need to spend long periods in the centre. Our recruitment has been limited. We are only approving new recruits if approved under special needs, if approved by the Director of Oncology and myself. We have the e-consent process, which is approved for our all our phase 1 trials. It is a red cap vehicle which can carry any paper consent. So for patients that need consent, we are implementing consent to allow many of the pre-screening processes to be completed prior to them arriving at the centre. And we are trying to reduce the time at site by completing all of these processes together, so that preferably we can actually have the drug ready for them and potentially even meet them at the door. Next slide. Under the investigational product, for some certain products like tablets, we have a vendor contracts with Marken who can potentially deliver. We have a very large proportion of patients live in country areas. About 40% of our patients live greater than 300 kilometres away. So we've had this vendor in place potentially for our teletrials program, but we can now actually implement this for any trials or reduce the risk to our patients. We try to pre-dispense to reduce time on site, and we've implemented a no retention policy for any tablets. Accountability is now performed by the coordinator, and all returns treated as biohazards. Accountability is performed by our coordinators and a quality manager. Documentation and instruction log is signed. We can provide photography of the returned tablets for reconciliation purposes, and then all IP is immediately destroyed. We've built policies and destruction logs and around this process. Happy to share it with anyone who is interested in having a look at this. This is the same process that was implemented in MD Anderson over in the United States about 10 years ago, and we looked at this process, and we believe this is a much more safer way of handling, because currently the drugs coming in from the community, we have no control over who has handled them, who has been in the environment, and when they're required to be stored on site, it's usually in the pharmacy. It's a biological risk for other products needing to go out. Next slide. So for sponsors and project, all SIV, SEVs and IMs are via virtual meetings only now. All the monitors are pre-screened a couple of days before they're due to end. We've stopped any non-essential visits to pharmacies or non-essential locations. And the monitoring frequency has limited to the maximum allowed under the monitoring plan and limited to 1 day only. Placement of monitors in isolated areas, And we have been looking at getting a remote monitoring fee. Due to the increasing clinical risk and the institutional risk of being overwhelmed by the patients, we have looked at providing external data clerks or medical secretaries who could facilitate some de-identifying of medical records and provide de-identified records to our monitors. So this offer could change at any time, because we also have to have a look at the risk to bringing people into the area. We get widespread infections, and the fees are to cover the fact that anyone coming into the centre could themselves be affected, be required to be paid for 14 days at home. We would have to replace it. So it's not an option some sponsors would be interested in. Next slide. So future considerations is if we move to further escalation of the risk, we have to prioritise care and management over data. We will have to quarantine staff and reduce, and hopefully we'll retain a healthy proportion of the workforce to continue. The school closures will reduce our staff availability. There is the risk of redeployment, and we've started preempting this quite possible risk by we're sending out to all. We have quite a large number of doctors who are overseas trained, which are not able to work in Australia as doctors who are working on our workforce, as well as registered nurses. Any clinical staff with clinical experience are being asked to consider whether they would offer themselves up for redeployment. What we are doing now is we're looking at doing some COVID-19 training through our respiratory specialists, who are going to do some online training with us this week. And we will get a series of waves and offer it up to the hospital as potential redeployment should the need arise. In the background, we are slowing down and stopping some of our administrative services. Our finance team will be reduced in their process to patient payments only to recover any transport costs. And any of the staff who have any may be escalated up to data management, and some of the other clinical staff who are science-based will be escalated up to coordinators to are able to cover for any clinical staff that may be redeployed. So we are busy this week retraining, putting people onto delegation logs, and just deciding the future of the department. In the event of major outbreak, we will halt all recruitment, and we will delay opening any new trials. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go straight. I'm going to pass Romana, and I'm going to ask Sally to talk, because I know Sally's got a time limit of 1 o'clock hard finish. So we just go to the next slide again. Sally to just give us a background on how she's seeing the effects on the monitors. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, Rob. Sorry I had to jump ahead of Romana. So just from our perspective, obviously first and foremost is the safety of everyone, and that includes our patients, the site staff and our CRAs. So we're following the guidance that's been put down by both the federal and the state governments. We're working with our sites and we're listening to what the sites are requesting. The CRAs are all being requested to call the sites and confirm if visits are still taking place prior to them just turning up, even though they may have previously confirmed the visits. We're remaining flexible, and we're working with our sites to make sure that we are meeting their needs, and that it's a two-way street. And from a study team perspective, we're looking at the studies holistically and taking into account regional and country nuances. And obviously, because it's a global pandemic, some of the study teams have already been able to make some changes. So we're looking at it holistically, and I guess the key to this, one of the keys to success is transparency with the sites as well as with the CRAs and the study teams. Rob, that's all I had. So Romana.
No, thanks. Could I just go back to the previous? And now Romana will be able to speak about, comes from one of the designated COVID hospitals. So I know Romana has been very kindly volunteered to find out some information and speak to it. Thanks, Romana.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can. Yes, you're there.
Oh, great. Okay. Sorry. So I'm the investigational drug unit at RPA. Just being transparent, I'm actually on maternity leave at the moment, so I'm not on the front line, but I've been watching from afar and helping the team out because they're obviously getting swamped. There's a lot of changes that are occurring and things are evolving constantly as we receive new information. So even just the information from today has been amazing, and we're going to take some back and implement it. So our situation is a little bit different. We obviously cannot work from home because our drugs are stored physically on site and there is temperature monitoring that is required. And we oversee about 200 trials at the moment, so we all have to be there. To give you some idea of what's happening in our pharmacy, our pharmacy is actually quite large and it's split over 2 levels that are connected by stairs. The trial offices are on one level next to the outpatient pharmacy, and our delivery area is located on the level below. So for OH&S reasons and space restrictions, our deliveries still occur down the bottom. And what's happened as of today is our pharmacy has actually been split in terms of staff, so we can no longer speak to or liaise with people on the different levels. So our department's basically been split into 2, and now our deliveries are with one team and our pharmacy trial team is with another team up the top. So we've got those logistical issues as well to sort out. So what we've done so far in amongst all the 200 trials is trying to identify what I call like touch points for transmission of where we will potentially infect staff for our trials. So for instance, handling of prescriptions, handling of returns, the presence of monitors touching the drugs and the folders during the on-site visit. They've all been identified as high-risk areas of transmission for staff. There's current data that suggests the virus actually lives on cardboard for 24 hours, for instance. So I'm not sure there wasn't a figure on paper. It's ever evolving. So we've got to consider things like the virus coming in from a delivery driver on a box, the virus coming in on a return from a patient. Our scripts, unfortunately, are not yet electronic. They're only for inpatients, so we still have to physically accept paper scripts legally. Our returns from patients, I think we're going to go down the path that Robert has suggested and just treat them now as a biohazard. Right now, we're only collecting them off staff members, not patients. They're going into a bag, and then we're dealing with them with PPE in our storage area, but they were actually being stored until monitors visited us. So I think we're going to have to look at reviewing that so we don't have them on site any longer than we have to. Because then there's also potential for cross-contamination with other activities and other staff in the department. Monitors, we're moving towards remote monitoring as much as we can, and again asking for reimbursement via a fee because the admin is now going to come onto our staff. In terms of prescriptions and dispensing, so that's another interaction with a patient or a study coordinator that we're trying to minimise. So we're trying to encourage scripts getting faxed or sent electronically for dispensing, original scripts to be dropped off by staff cleared of COVID. The whole hospital is actually undergoing COVID screening in the morning daily before they start their shift. So hopefully we're not infecting staff through that touch system either. Where we have inpatients, we're going to try and use the eMed system, but as I said, most of ours are outpatients. So another thing, wiping plastic sleeves with alcohol. So just say we get a script, maybe a patient has dropped it in, we're putting it in a plastic sleeve, wiping the plastic sleeve with alcohol, then dealing with the prescription in that way, as we don't know how long the virus will be transmitted on paper. Handing medications out, again, we're trying to only deal with study coordinators who have been cleared of COVID, and then they can post the medication to patients if need be. Drug supply has or could be an issue, so sponsors have been requesting bulk intakes of stock. Some of this only has short expiries and we physically don't have the space to store it all, so we're really trying to only take on what's really necessary. Also, then you've got to consider if we had a temperature excursion and whatnot, what would happen there. Couriers is another issue, so I'm not sure any sponsor representatives listening. There's some couriers that only allow one staff member to sign, so this may need to change to be any pharmacy staff member that can accept it from our receiving docs, because we don't want to have this cross-infection between different levels and different staff members in the department. Then we have issues with staff containment and quarantine at the moment, because all our staff share an office. So another thing we've implemented is one of our senior staff members, so Fiona, is going to be working from home as a backup in case our whole level of the department ends up having to go in quarantine because someone ends up positive, which will put all of our staff into the isolation category. So we'll have at least one team member who is able to come in and do the dispensing for the patient and just work on like minimally dispensing. Another consideration we had, for instance, was manufacturing. So what happens if our manufacturing team tests positive to COVID and they have to go into quarantine? So we have some backups. So we've got our cytotoxic unit might have a spare hood. We're in discussions with another hospital within our area. Could they potentially prepare the medication for us? But again, we'd need sponsor approval for that. Could we now, for new trials potentially moving forward, contract Slade as an external vendor to do that as well? Or do we move to, we're going to have an unblinded nurse potentially preparing these drugs for the patients, or do the patients just skip those doses? So these are all things that are happening as we're moving along. And in terms of dispensing, we have thrown around the idea of maybe dispensing out of hours. We're really trying to encourage study coordinators where possible to send us prescriptions ahead of time so that we can get all the medications ready and patients don't have to wait, and basically just minimise any time that patients or study coordinators need to be interacting with us at the window. So I think that's it at the moment, and yeah, just wear PPE where we can.
Perfect. Thank you, Romana. I just want to thank Sally before she runs away, but yeah, now I would love to open up to everyone to get some questions and ask, discuss, find out from you how you're doing it. That'd be great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks. Hand it back to
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thanks very much, guys. This has been an incredibly informative session, and just say, first of all, that due to an overwhelming number of people logging on, it has caused congestion issues. Some people haven't been able to hear and have dropped off, but if you're in contact with those people, we will be recording and putting that recording out so people can get that information. It's been very, very useful from a content perspective. So let's open up for discussion and thoughts from people from the audience. So technically, are we doing this through the questions, or do we do them online? Can somebody come in and say something?
Hi, Shani, it's Sue here from the ARC's office. We are, if you have any questions, please add them into the question function, and I will read out the questions, and Rob, Cheryl, Romana or Sally will be able to answer. So Rob, we do have a couple of questions already typed in. One is, how much is the remote monitoring fee being charged?
Look, at the moment, we were looking at a fee around $800 a month. That would cover that covers us for the fact that one person could potentially have to go home sick and be paid for 2 weeks. That's the equivalent of about a 1 day per week for an admin staff to manage it, and then that would be the point of contact. The problem we'll have is if we don't bring in externals, we just won't have staff to keep the trial patients going. And I mean, it's very important, like a single breach, I believe, under New South Wales privacy, if we send something out with a patient's name on it, I think that the fee's around $250,000 fee fine if we actually release identified information.
Thanks, Rob. There's another question that for the presenters. If someone has experience using site docs for remote ISF inspections, is that working well for them currently with that system?
It's Cheryl Ann speaking. We've had site docs for about 6 or 7 months now, and we haven't had an inspection of that platform at this stage, but we've had plenty of experience with monitors using the platform remotely.
Thanks, Cheryl. There is another question. Can the SOP on destruction of returns prior to CRA review please be shared?
Absolutely. I'll send through all the documents to be posted.
There is another question that's come up that do sites feel they're getting good communications from CROs?
Could I add something to that? It's Romana here, sorry. I think what I've heard from the girls is the communication is good, but sometimes because everyone's working from home, there's too many emails coming out. So they're getting, for instance, one trial, maybe 5 to 10 emails per day. Whereas, so as you can imagine, there's a lot going on. So we're just asking if people can condense it into just one email for all the things they need per day, just to stop that traffic of information coming through as another thing that they have to do.
And I'll back you up on that. I mean, I understand we're trying to, the monitors who are trying to work from home are contacting us constantly. We just don't have the staff to respond to the detail. They're all asking for remote monitoring, and our staff are busy just reskilling and preparing to. I mean, the current process of pre-screening everyone is taking up a lot of resources as well. So, I mean, we would always ask our sponsors partners just to be understanding, and I'm sure they are. They just we're all trying to learn a new way of operating.
Thanks, Rob. There's another question.
Sorry, it's Cheryl Ann speaking. I think the statements coming from the larger sponsors have been very helpful and very supportive of sites. So it is appreciative getting those statements, once a week in regards to how they're responding to this as well.
Thanks, Cheryl Ann. There is another question saying, are HRECs providing any guidance on what they want reported in respect to patient visits, so with remote visits, delays, sending IP by courier, etc.? And are HRECs currently resourced to handle such requests, or should it be considered a retrospective reporting as opposed to requesting approval?
So I know at Alfred Health, our RGO and HREC are happy to potentially have a report sent to them en masse later on in regards to urgent safety measures that need to be implemented to ensure the safety of the patients on clinical trials.
And we haven't had any specific instructions from our ethics as such, but we are just documenting. At the moment, there is no need for, there's no safety-related deviations at the moment, but it will come down to the fact if there's something that is clinically needed for the safety of the staff and the patients, we will go ahead and do it as we normally would, and then notify them retrospectively.
Thanks, Cheryl Ann and Rob. There is another question saying, how are we handling the asymptomatic patients?
Well, we just pre-screen them prior to arriving. If they're asymptomatic, they're just treated. We have got, because of telehealth, our waiting room is being reduced by about 70%. So there's a lot of space down there. Most of the normal follow-up visits for normal patients coming into the clinic are all done via telehealth. So the trial patients have there's a lot more space. The whole point of us doing work from home at the moment is to space everyone out, and we're spreading out our staff so there's just reduced traffic everywhere.
Thanks, Rob. There is a question around someone's local ethics committee saying that any changes need to implement it will need to be submitted for their approval prior to implementation. Are there likely to be national guidelines submitted to HREX? I guess to say that there will be a webinar specifically around HREC and governance, and we could probably ask that question there. But if Cheryl, Anne or Rob or Romana have any comments to this, please feel free to respond.
I haven't seen a national approach taken, but I do believe Transalorate are releasing statements from a GCP perspective. But it would be good to have a national approach to this by NHMRC, and I don't know what the plans are.
So
Romana here, we haven't seen anything either.
Look, it's Shani here. There are some things in the wings. They haven't been finalised yet, but I'm expecting to see something today that will give us some sort of indication of a national approach. We just don't have it as yet.
And I think this comes down to safety, and even under GCP, any action that you take in regards to maintaining the patient's safety, it's act first and tell them later.
Yeah, and absolutely agree there, Rob. I think it becomes a risk-based situation where you're looking at the safety of both the patient, the trial staff, and then obviously the integrity of the data. So I think if people think of it through those lenses, then they can make the right decisions, and I'm sure HREX will abide by those in a sensible way. So, Sue, are there any further questions?
There are a few more questions.
Sure. I'm just going to go through a couple more questions. I think we're going to run out of time. So if you can just get through those, that would be great.
Okay, so I've got a question here saying, what, apart from asking people about flu-like symptoms, is there any other questions you're asking over the phone when you're doing your pre-screening?
We ask them if they've been in contact with someone with known to be COVID infections. We ask them if they've known anyone who's travelled over to any of the risk countries or anywhere from overseas has actually been escalated to anyone who's travelled recently. I think most of the infections, cross-infections, have come from people from the United States. So we just talk about their home environment, who they've been in contact with, and if they have any of the risks but they're not symptomatic, we would meet them at the door, put a mask on them and sanitise their hands, and we'll try and keep them isolated while they're completing their visit.
Thanks, Rob. There's a question around, could anyone share any details around the e-consent platform that's being used?
Well, we currently use the RedCap. It's a electronic carrying system that you actually embed the paper form into. We submitted this to Bellbury, who is the phase 1 ethics committee, back in December, January, and it's been approved for use in any phase 1 trial. Of course, we also submit it on a case we re-embed the new consent form for each project, and we notify built into our SOP, and we notify the sponsors. And I'm happy to share that with, if you have RedCap, it's a very secure system. Happy to share the template that we use and how we do it.
Thanks, Rob. There's still quite a number of questions. So do you want to continue with some more questions, or do we?
I'm happy to continue as long as you like.
Okay, just continue on with the questions, but what we might be able to do is keep taking questions and post them on our website if there's too many. I'm just cognizant that we allocated this time and that there might be people who need to go off to other meetings or other teleconferences, etc. So maybe just select a couple of I think pertinent questions, Sue, and then we might get those and potentially post them.
Okay, let me just have a look. So there's a question around for the trials whose progression have been completely put on hold due to COVID-19. Are there any indications of what funding bodies will do, and will funding be put on hold?
I haven't.
Doesn't look like we've got an answer for that one, Sue. So what's your next question?
And then there's another, just a comment
notice.
saying, sorry, there's a comment saying that a draft has been made and there's a meeting this afternoon to finalise the draft coordinated via the Commonwealth. So we will see more responses. I think there are just quite a large number of questions, Shani, that we'll just take offline.
Yep. Okay.
And respond to them as required.
Okay. All right. Look, thank you, everyone. And again, my apologies that our system was just totally overloaded, and we will put a note out to those who dropped off to provide them the recording. I'd like to again thank our sponsors, MTP Connect, who are helping us to deliver this. I'd like to also thank our panellists today, Rob Kent, Romana, Cheryl, Ann, and Sally for their time today. I think their presentations have been incredibly informative, and we greatly appreciate their time. So look, thank you so much. Our next session is going to be on the 31st, which is the Tuesday. We're going to have part 2 being the peak bodies and the TGA. So we've got the clinical trials team from the TGA and peak bodies that will give their kind of view and really, I guess, interactions with the government and the national approach hopefully will be implemented by that time. Any other information that we have that's of relevance and updated, we will provide that through our website. So for those of you who don't know, we're ARCS Australia at www.arcs.com.au, and recordings and information that we've been hearing today will be on the website. We have, after Tuesday next week, we will have a regular webinar every Monday, and hopefully we can manage the numbers and get everybody able to be on and hearing as appropriate. So thank you so much for everybody's time, and look forward to having another session next week, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.